Today, I'm going to be painting up my favorite Night Sister and former apprentice to Count Dooku, Asajj Ventress, as brought to you by damiensaber. More on them later in the episode. My name's Angela, and welcome to Hobby Night. Oh, sorry. I haven't been able to stop playing with this since I got it. You see, when damiensaber reached out to me and was like, hey, we'd like to sponsor an episode and also send you a lightsaber, I jumped at the opportunity and knew exactly who I wanted to paint for this tutorial. None other than one of my favorite Clone Wars characters, Asajj Ventress. The only question I have now is which Asajj Ventress should I paint? Because you see, I have one from both Shatterpoint and Star Wars Legion. But which one should I actually paint? Shatterpoints? Legions? Shatterpoints? Legions?
Why not both?
You know what? Chaos Cultist makes a great point. Why don't I just paint both? And in fact, I think that's exactly what I'm going to do. So without further ado, let's paint Asajj Ventress from both Star Wars Shatterpoint and Star Wars Legion. The first thing that I need to do before we can get to work on either of our miniatures is make sure that they're both primed. So I headed upstairs to my porch and made sure to get them primed up using Gray Seer. Once that was done, we can take them back down to the hobby room and get to working on these miniatures. Now, before I get started, I was actually debating where should I begin on these models because there's no really recessed area. So ultimately, I decided to work on the darkest color tones first, which means that we're gonna be working with a ton of purples. And I know this probably should come as no surprise because 1, Ventress is wearing a lot of purples, and 2, it's me. Why do you think I chose her? She's wearing a lot of purples. Anyways, the first color that we need to work with is Leviathan Purple. Now this is a contrast purple color tone that I absolutely love, but I always forget that it dries super flat. So after I've got it put down on both the skirt and her top on both of the models, I'm looking at it going, it's not doing quite what I wanted it to do. So I'm going to turn to my savior, Lord Duncan, because I remembered I have his 2 thin coats line of paints. And in those 2 thin coat line of paints are a couple of really gorgeous purples that I've sort of played around with a little bit, but haven't messed around with too much. And I think this is a perfect opportunity. And the first one we're going to work with is Sorcerer's Cloak. This is a really lovely mid-tone purple that blends in with Leviathan Purple super well. So we're gonna apply this to both models with a heavy dry brush on all the things that we painted purple already. Then once I'm satisfied with how that's looking, and gosh darn it, it's already improving the look of these outfits so much, I do want to come back in with one final lighter highlight color to really emphasize those folds, especially on the skirt. And to do that, we're going to come back in with Runic Purple. This is again another of the 2 thin coats line, and it's a slightly lighter color tone than what we used previously, and it blends in beautifully again with all the colors we've worked with already. I love the way the skirts are looking. I think doing this dry brushing technique worked beautifully, and I'm going to be using this combination of 3 colors going forward a lot more because Leviathan Purple is just so deep and rich, but it needs those highlights, and I think I found the perfect highlight colors. Now, the last thing that I want to work on purple-wise is the loincloth. For this, we're going to be using Magos Purple, which is a much more reddish purple color tone, perfect to match the character model of Ventress from the Clone Wars series. And once we have that down, we can start doing a little bit of cleanup. And now a word from today's sponsor, damiensaber, the makers of this wonderful lightsaber that you've been seeing me wield throughout today's episode. And I have to admit, I've absolutely loved playing with this thing ever since I got it. It has a huge variety of color options for the blade, the hilt makes a variety of fun sounds, and it's all changeable by the push of a button, which is super easy to use, and it's absolutely just so cool to play with. If you've ever wanted to get a lightsaber for yourself and want to check out the various hilt designs that they have available on their website, I've left a link to it down in the video description below, and I highly encourage you to check out damiensaber to see if you can find your perfect lightsaber. This particular one is from Revan, but they have a huge variety of other characters available, and I would highly encourage you to check them out. Thank you once again to damiensaber for sponsoring today's episode. Now let's go ahead and get back to painting. I am absolutely loving how the purple of her outfit has turned out, but I did get a lot of purple in a lot of places that I don't want it. So we're going to take some time now to do a very short cleanup step. which is predominantly going to involve using some gray sear on the wraps on her torso, on her arms, as well as the belt that's around her waist. Now you might be going, Angela, aren't you forgetting all the flesh tone that you need to clean up as well? Well, don't worry, because I didn't see the need to use gray sear on it when I was just going to be using an opaque base color tone next on the flesh, which is specifically going to be called Opal Skin. This is a really lovely flesh tone, very pale, very slightly pinky from the Army Painter, and I think it works perfect for Ventress. We're gonna put this down on all of her face, her hands, everything where you see flesh exposed, which really isn't that many areas, but also her back. I just wanna say, I love the muscle details they put on both sculpts on her back. It's just so good. I absolutely love it. I'm getting sidetracked though, because once we have Opal Skin down, I wanna come back in with Dreadful Visage. We're going to use this as a shade over all of the flesh, but I'm also going to put this on all of the wraps as well, because if you look at the art for Ventress, on those wraps, they tend to have a mix of sort of a purpley blue color tone. So I figured Dreadful Visage would be good as a base, and then we'll put some blues over top it next. But I'm still working on her skin. And I noticed something after Dreadful Visage had dried, especially on her head. That beautiful bald head of hers, it had sort of dried a little bit splotchy. So to help smooth that up and to emphasize some details on her face and hands, we're gonna come back in with a dry brush using Opal Skin one more time. This works beautifully. It adds a little bit of highlight back to her face, really helps her eyes pop a lot, and it smooths out that head where it had some splotchiness. I'm loving the way this is looking, and now we can move on to the details. Speaking of those details, we can move on to those next. And we're gonna come back immediately to those wraps because I wanted to add a little bit of a blue tint to them. And how I'm going to do that is using Apothecary White. Over top the Dreadful Visage, this does exactly what I want. It gives me that very subtle blue tint while still having a little bit of that purple shine through. And now it looks very on model in my opinion. Then we need to come back in with a little bit of Soul Blight Gravelord for the belt. This is going to just be a lovely sort of soft white color tone because honestly, Ventress's color tone entirely is a bunch of purples and whites and various mixes of those with very other little colors in there except for the saber and that loincloth. Speaking of the loincloth, we need to focus on that a little bit and add the gold coloring to it. Because you see there's a beautiful pattern on there and that is going to be done up in greedy gold. This goes very smoothly and I love how it pops against that slightly reddish tint of the Magos purple. The next step is to work on the hilt of her saber. Now she has some unique lightsabers, and I really like the fact that she actually has curved sabers gifted to her by Count Dooku, who she obviously apprenticed to. I love Dooku's sabers, I love Asajj's sabers. Let's actually get them painted. So the first step I need to do is pull out some Black Legion and apply this to the entirety of both sabers' hilts. Then we're gonna come back in using some sterling silver and do a nice pattern on here with this little stripe pattern, because that's what Asajj Ventress's sabers look like. And I will say, this is where I noticed the biggest difference between both the Shatterpoint miniature and the Legion miniature, because the Legion miniature actually made painting the stripes a lot easier. It was actually sort of bulbous and they had a dip where the black would be. And I think that made it really, really simple to paint. Whereas the Shatterpoint miniature, which I think is a little bit more accurate to the actual saber hilt itself, was a lot smoother. So painting the little ring of silver was a little bit more challenging because I didn't really have something to help guide me around that. But I think they both turned out great. And then the last thing that I needed to do before we move on to the blade of the saber is to apply a small Nuln Oil wash to the entire thing, just to help mute that silver slightly, re-deepen the blacks, and smooth everything over. Hey guys, just jumping into the video to remind you to hit that subscribe button and bell icon for notifications so you never miss future content on the channel. And if you're into the spicier side of the hobby, you can find a link to my Only Fanatics down in the link tree below in the description. Now, let's go ahead and get back to the video. We're finally down to painting the Sith red blade of her lightsaber. And for this, I want to base coat it first in a pure white. That way, the Blood Angels red that I put on next will stand out as brightly as possible. Now, in the previous Star Wars painting tutorials that I've done, when I've gotten to the sabers, I've had a little bit of a white highlight to try to give a glow effect. And while I think that works really well on the green and blue sabers, I don't think it actually looks that great on the red sabers that I've done. I just haven't figured out how to get it to look quite right. So I'm gonna try something a little bit different this time. Instead of going with a pure white highlight, I'm going to first start with a highlight using Wild Rider Red. This is something that I've done on some of my other tutorials where I've gone into a red, yellow, orange color tone. And I think we're gonna do a little bit of a similar thing here. So once the Wild Rider Red is down, we're gonna add a little bit of white gradually into Wild Rider Red and just keep layering on until I'm satisfied with the glow effect. It's a bit more subtle than what I get with the pure white, but I think it looks so much better, and it just makes them actually look like they do in the movies, because the red sabers don't glow quite as crisply as some of those other color tones. And I love how Asajj has turned out, and now all we need to do is work on the base. Technically, there's only one base that I need to paint because I already painted the Shatterpoint ones back when I did the rest of my Shatterpoint miniatures.
Excuse me, I painted that base, thank you.
Okay, yes, technically the Chaos Cultist painted the base, so if you really like the way my Shatterpoint Asajj Ventress' base look, that is because of the Chaos Cultist. But I need to deal with the Legion base, and I'm gonna make this match the rest of my Legion miniatures, which is pretty simple. First, I'm going to put just a brown base coat on the base to help the texture paint that I'm going to use next stick a little bit better. And that texture paint that I'm going to be using is Armageddon Dust. It's kind of my go-to. I use it on a lot of my models. I just really like it. I think it's very flexible and easy to manipulate. So once the Armageddon Dust is down and it's dried and it's looking lovely, we're going to put an Agrass Earthshade wash over top of it very heavily. I really want this to be kind of like dark. Once that has thoroughly dried, we're gonna come back in with a Wraithbone dry brush. This is, again, to help it match the rest of my Legion miniatures. It gives it a very nice sort of dry, sort of sandy limestone look. I don't know, I really, really like the look of this base. And once that is dry, we can glue both of the models down to their respective bases and then take a look at the final product. And here they are, both of my Asajj Ventress models, one from Shatterpoint and the other from Star Wars Legion. And honestly, I think both models are fantastic. There were some very minor differences between them, predominantly in the hilt of the actual lightsaber itself. But other than that, I think they're both fantastic. I'm really glad that I have them both now painted up. And I'm really glad that I discovered such an awesome combination of purples for fabric going forward, because gosh darn, do I love what I did on her skirt, both of them. I think both of them look absolutely stunning. Now, before I head out, I do want to give a huge thank you to damiensaber for sponsoring today's episode. Remember that if you want to check out the lightsabers that they have available, you can use the link that I've left in the video description below to check out all the various options that they have, including Ventress's, Luke Skywalker, Kanan Jarrus, which is one of my all-time favorites. There's a whole huge selection to choose from, so do be sure to check them out. And thank you once again for sending me this awesome lightsaber, as well as sponsoring today's episode, damiensaber. And I do want to give one final shout out to my patrons as well for also helping keep this content going. You guys' support is awesome, and I absolutely would not be doing this without you guys, so thank you very, very much. And I hope you all have an absolutely wonderful hobby night. I've been Angela, and I'll see y'all next time.